Psalm 24 ends with one of my favorite titles that the Bible gives to God for us to consider, and that is the Lord Almighty. It says, "Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty, he is the King of glory." So let's start with the second part of that, Almighty. Makes me think of the kid song, "My God is so great. My God is so great, so strong and so mighty. There's nothing my God cannot do." There are more verses, but it's true. And how often did God prove that it was true? Think of your favorite miracle in the Bible, the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus walking on water, Jesus pulling a pulling a coin out of the fish of a mouth because he needed to pay taxes, driving apart the waters of the Red Sea, the fire coming down for Elijah when he was confronting the prophets of Baal, when he prayed for fire from the heavens just coming down and showing that the Lord, he is God, the Lord, he is God. Lots of examples of the Lord being almighty. He can do anything, 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 anything. He can do anything. But he's also the Lord. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. And when the Old Testament Israelites would have heard that name, they would have thought, most often, I think, of Moses at the burning bush, when Moses asked the one who was speaking to him through the burning bush, who was telling him to go to Egypt and set his people free, saying, well, what if they ask me his name? What should I tell them? They would have been thinking of all of that. And if you go back to Exodus chapter 3 and read through that, it's really significant what compelled God to speak to Moses through the burning bush. God told Moses what compelled him to speak to Moses through the burning bush that day. There were two things. First one was, I have seen the misery of my people. He saw their misery. And the second, I have heard their cries. He heard their cries. And so that answers the question, if you ever find yourself asking it, for whom will the Lord use his almighty power? For those who are in misery, from grief, from guilt, from pain, from loss, and for those who cry out to him again and again and again and again, or just one time, crying out to God, knowing exactly what you want him to know and communicating that well, or crying out to God with a mess in your gut that you don't know how to communicate. The Bible assures us that God hears both prayers, and he understands them even better than we do. The Lord Almighty is the King who is there for anybody who needs help in any kind of way. Do you need help? Are you hurting? Is there a part of your life that you consider just a miserable existence? Or is that true for someone you know? Remember who our King is. Remember what he used his almighty power to do one day on a dark, dark Friday. He used his almighty power to hang on a cross and not move. As his blood was dripping down his skin, as the nails were rubbing against the insides of his hands and feet, as his ripped up back was scratching up against the wood. With every slightest moment of movement, shooting pain went through his body. The Lord Almighty, who can do anything, chose to earn our trust. That's what he did. Because he used his almighty power to hang there and do nothing but love you and leave you forgiven. You can trust him. Point your eyes to him. Point the eyes of those who are hurting in your life to Him, to the Lord Almighty, who doesn't know how to not be there for us. Rest well tonight, my friends.